Billionaire catches Maid Breastfeeding. His son. His reaction will surprise you. The unlikely nurse, Maya Williams, had never imagined her life would take such an unexpected turn. She had worked as a neonatal nurse for many years, caring for newborns and comforting parents. After losing her own child, she had turned to housekeeping to heal, far from the painful memories of her past life. But her professional training never truly left her. It lingered silently, deep inside her, a constant reminder of the knowledge and the skills she possessed. She had never intended to use them in the home of a billionaire, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. Maya's new job as a maid at the Moore family estate was meant to be just that, a job. It was a means to an end, a way to make a living while she tried to rebuild her life after the loss of her son. Bryce, the infant son of Arthur Moore, the billionaire CEO of a successful tech company, had been one of her responsibilities from the beginning. She didn't mind the work. There was something soothing about it. Caring for a child, watching him grow and develop, was something she could do without thinking too much about the pain that still lingered in her heart. Arthur Moore, on the other hand, was a man of discipline and precision. A widower, a CEO, and the head of an empire, he was always in control. His home, like his company, was built on the ideals of order and success. He had little time for anything that didn't contribute to that success, including the help. Maya had come to understand quickly that the staff at the Moore estate was just a cog in the wheel of a much bigger machine. She didn't mind. It was a job. But she noticed Arthur's distance from the people who served him and his family. He kept to himself, rarely engaging with the staff, except to give instructions. One quiet afternoon, while the house was still, Maya found herself alone in the nursery with Bryce. The baby had been fussy for days, rejecting the formula that his parents had tried to feed him. He had grown weaker, a pale version of the energetic, giggling child she had first met when she started working at the estate. Maya knew the signs. She had seen them before. Babies shutting down when they were too weak to cry, when they refused to eat because their bodies no longer had the strength to do so. She couldn't sit by and watch this child fade. Arthur, consumed by work and grief after his wife's passing, had not been able to notice the subtle changes in Bryce's behavior. The child was growing thinner by the day, and Maya, despite being a maid, could not ignore her training. She had been a nurse before, a good one. She still had milk from when she had nursed her own son, Elijah. It was not uncommon for women who had recently lost a child to continue producing milk. And when Bryce, weak and tired, had latched on her breast that day, she felt a surge of protective instinct that she had not felt in a long time. She hummed a lullaby, her heart aching for the life she had lost, but still desperately wanting to save the life before her. Maya had been caught in a moment of tenderness, a moment that seemed like the most natural thing in the world. She hadn't meant for Arthur to find her like this, but she didn't regret it. She had to do something, anything to help. But when Arthur walked into the nursery, his face frozen with shock and fury, Maya's heart stopped. The moment was shattered. His eyes locked on the scene before him, Maya cradling his son in her arms, breastfeeding him as if this were some common act. Arthur's shock quickly turned to anger. "What the hell are you doing to my son?" he demanded, his voice like a whip cutting through the air. Maya froze, the harshness of his words slicing through her. Her mind raced as she tried to find the right words, to explain what had happened. She never expected this. She had hoped that she could simply help, quietly, without interference. But the look in Arthur's eyes told her that she was in far deeper than she had realized. His shock turned to fury as he stormed toward her, his fists clenched at his sides. His voice rose with each word, full of disbelief and rage. "You get your hands off my son," he bellowed, stepping closer, his tone sharp and commanding. Maya carefully detached Bryce from her breast, holding him gently as she cradled him to her chest. She didn't know what to say. She knew what she had done was unconventional, but in her heart she had only tried to help. "Mr. Moore, please let me explain," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of the situation. But Arthur wasn't listening. He was too angry, too overwhelmed by what he had just witnessed. His eyes, wide with rage, pierced through her. "You think you can just touch my child? Feed him like some damn wet nurse?" His words were cutting, full of disdain. "This is my son," Who the hell gave you the right?" He was shouting now, his voice cracking with emotion. Maya stood, still holding Bryce protectively in her arms. She felt the sting of Arthur's words, the rawness of his anger, but she didn't flinch. She had no choice but to stand her ground. "I didn't plan it," she began softly, trying to explain. "He hadn't eaten in days. The formula, he kept rejecting it. He was growing weaker." Her voice shook as she spoke, but she refused to back down. I used to be a neonatal nurse and I still produce milk. He latched. He needed it." Arthur stepped closer, his towering presence feeling suffocating. His anger still burned brightly, but there was something else, something deeper, that seemed to flicker in his eyes. He had been consumed by his own grief and anger for so long that the idea of anyone else taking care of his son, especially someone like Maya, felt like a personal betrayal. "You crossed a line," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. He towered over her, his face twisted in rage. "You don't touch what's mine. You don't make choices for my family." Without warning, Arthur slapped her, a sharp, open-handed blow that left Maya stumbling sideways. Bryce, still clutched in her arms, whimpered at the sudden movement. Maya gasped, her hand instinctively flying to her cheek where the slap had landed, but she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at him, wide-eyed, in stunned silence. "You don't get to do that," she whispered, her voice quiet but filled with raw emotion. "I saved your son." Arthur stood frozen for a moment, as if not fully understanding what had just happened. His hands still hung in the air, trembling, as though even he couldn't believe what he had done. The silence in the room felt deafening, thick with the weight of the violence that had just unfolded. "I don't need saving from someone like you," he spat, his voice full of disdain. Maya's heart ached, but she didn't react. She simply turned, slowly, her body still shielding Bryce from the world that had just turned against her. She didn't know how long she stood there, feeling the sting of Arthur's slap, the shock of his words. But when she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "You think I crossed a line?" she asked quietly, her eyes never leaving his. "You think I'm the one who crossed a line? You have no idea what it's like to watch a child slip away in your arms." Arthur's face twisted, a mix of guilt and anger still warring within him, but he couldn't deny the truth in her words. Instead of responding, he turned and walked away, leaving Maya standing there in the silence of the nursery, holding Bryce close, as though the world outside no longer existed. The shock of discovery. Maya stood there for a long moment, Bryce still nestled in her arms, her heart pounding in her chest. The sting of Arthur's slap still burned on her cheek, but it was the weight of his disbelief that hurt more. The look in his eyes, rage mixed with confusion, was almost too much to bear. She had hoped that by helping his son, she could restore some sense of calm in the household, but all it had done was spark an explosion of emotions that she hadn't expected. The nursery was eerily quiet now, the silence hanging heavy in the air. Arthur had stormed out in a fit of anger, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts. She gently placed Bryce in his crib, watching the baby for a moment as he shifted restlessly, still not fully content with the formula they had tried to feed him. But at least, for now, he was no longer crying. His small form, once trembling with hunger, now seemed to be at peace, albeit briefly. Maya exhaled, running a trembling hand through her hair as she tried to calm herself. What had just happened? She had never imagined her life would lead to such a moment, nursing a child that wasn't hers, especially under these circumstances. She wasn't proud of the way things had unfolded, but her only desire had been to save the baby, to ensure that Bryce had a chance to thrive. And yet, all she had done was create chaos in a world already burdened with grief and loss. Arthur's reaction to the situation was still fresh in her mind. His fury had come so suddenly, without warning. He hadn't even given her a chance to explain herself. In the chaos of that moment, it felt as though his anger wasn't even about the child or what she had done. It was about something deeper, something buried beneath the surface. Perhaps it was about the pain of losing his wife, about his inability to deal with his own grief and guilt. But whatever it was, Maya had become the scapegoat for everything he couldn't face. She moved quietly through the house, her footsteps barely audible on the polished marble floors. The Moore estate was beautiful, yes, but it felt like a prison now. Every hallway seemed longer, every room more oppressive. She had come here seeking peace and a fresh start, but now she realized she was walking on eggshells, constantly on the verge of upsetting the delicate balance of the family's life. As she made her way toward her quarters, she passed by the living room, where the other staff members were gathered. They fell silent as she entered, their eyes flickering toward her in a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Maya felt the weight of their gaze but didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she kept her eyes straight ahead, walking quickly toward the door to her small room. Inside, she sat on the bed, still clutching the small suitcase she had packed when she first arrived. For a moment, she thought about leaving. After all, the situation had become unbearable. She had done what she thought was right, and now she had been slapped for it, both literally and figuratively. Maybe it was time to leave, to find a new job where she wouldn't have to worry about crossing lines or upsetting people. But as she looked down at Bryce's baby clothes on the bed beside her, her heart softened. She couldn't leave him. Not after everything that had happened. Bryce was a vulnerable child who needed someone to protect him, someone who would make sure he was safe and loved. In that moment, Maya realized that leaving wasn't an option, not when the child still needed her care. The house was quiet that evening, with the usual hum of activity muted by the earlier confrontation. Maya lay in bed, her mind racing. She wondered what would happen next. Would Arthur come to apologize? Would he see that she had only acted out of a sense of duty, driven by the maternal instinct that had never left her, even after losing her own child? As the night wore on, the sound of the house grew quieter still. The usual bustle of the staff, the clinking of dishes, the soft murmur of voices, all of it had faded into a stillness that was almost suffocating. Maya pulled the covers tighter around her, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. The image of Arthur's angry face, his harsh words, and the slap that had left her reeling lingered in her mind. She thought of her own son, Elijah, and the unbearable pain of losing him. The feeling of holding him in her arms as he slipped away, slowly and silently. Maya had never fully healed from that loss, and now with Bryce in her care, the memories of Elijah came rushing back. She had never intended for this to be her life, caring for someone else's child. But now, in the quiet of her room, it felt like fate had led her here for a reason. Maybe this was her second chance, not just to care for a child, but to redeem herself from the grief and regret that had followed her since Elijah's death. The next morning, Maya went about her usual tasks with a quiet determination. She made the beds, cleaned the kitchen, and attended to the other duties of the house. But something had shifted in her. The slap, the anger, the confrontation. It all felt like a distant memory now. Her focus had returned to Bryce, the child who needed her more than anything. She would not let Arthur's rage or the weight of her own past stand in the way of doing what was best for him. At breakfast, Arthur did not speak to her. His usual aloofness was even more pronounced, and Maya felt the tension between them like a tangible thing. She could sense that Arthur was still grappling with what had happened, trying to reconcile his own guilt with his anger, but she didn't allow his silence to affect her. She focused on the task at hand, ensuring that Bryce was fed, that his needs were met, and that the day passed without further incident. In the days that followed, Maya continued her routine, but she knew things couldn't remain the same. The tension in the house was thick, and it seemed like everyone was walking on eggshells. Maya wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't leaving. Not until she had made sure Bryce was safe and cared for. And maybe, just maybe, she could help the Moore family heal in ways they hadn't expected. The explanation. Arthur stood in the hallway, his mind racing. The house was still, too still for his liking. The silence was oppressive, a reminder of the confrontation that had unfolded only days earlier. His eyes drifted toward the nursery door, but he quickly averted his gaze. He couldn't bring himself to face the situation head-on, at least not yet. What had he done? What kind of father had he become? The image of Maya, his maid, nursing his son, Bryce, replayed in his mind over and over. He could still feel the shock, the rush of anger that had clouded his judgment. But in the aftermath, in the quiet hours when he lay awake at night, something else had started to surface. A deep sense of guilt. The fury had been instinctual, protective, but now it felt misplaced, like he had overreacted. Bryce was his son, yes, but Maya had only acted out of compassion. She had cared for him when no one else could. Arthur ran a hand through his hair. The guilt gnawed at him. How could he have struck her? How could he have let his emotions cloud his judgment like that? Maya had only tried to help, yet he had made her feel like a criminal. He had seen the shock in her eyes, the way she flinched when he slapped her. He had felt like the worst kind of man, a man who had hurt the very person who had saved his son's life. Still, Arthur couldn't shake the questions that plagued him. How had Maya, a maid in his house, known how to care for his son in a way he couldn't? How had she been so calm, so composed, in the face of his anger? Why had she acted in such a way without hesitation when the rest of the household had failed to notice the signs of Bryce's distress? And then, the explanation Maya had offered, the words she had said in the heat of the moment. "I didn't plan it," she had told him. He hadn't eaten in days. The formula, he kept rejecting it. He was growing weaker. She had been a neonatal nurse once, and still, she had the ability to help. Arthur had been too blinded by rage to listen to her, but now he couldn't stop hearing her voice in his head. Maya had done what any mother would do when faced with a child in need. She had stepped in. She had saved him. And yet, Arthur had been too caught up in his own pride to see it. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been a father once, a husband. His late wife, Claire, had been his everything, and after her death, Arthur had closed off, retreating into his work and his grief. The loss of Claire had left a hole in his heart, one he had never been able to fill. Bryce, his son, had become the living reminder of her, and in a way, the loss of his wife had made Arthur overprotective, possessive even. He had become blind to the people who cared for him and his son, unwilling to see beyond his own pain. But Maya's actions had forced him to confront something he had buried deep inside, his own inadequacy as a father. He had been so focused on keeping his family intact, on trying to fill the void Claire's death had left, that he had ignored the needs of his son. He had been too wrapped up in his own grief to see that Bryce needed someone to care for him, to nurture him. Maya had stepped into that role, and in doing so, she had shown Arthur the kind of father he aspired to be, but had failed to become. Arthur's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Maya. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he hesitated. What could he say to her? What could he say to the woman he had slapped, the woman who had saved his son's life? How could he apologize for something so unforgivable? He opened the door to find Maya standing there, her eyes downcast. She looked tired, but there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself. She wasn't afraid to face him, not anymore. Arthur had expected her to be angry, to demand something more from him, but instead she was calm, composed. He could see the bruise on her cheek, still faint but there, a physical reminder of the violence he had inflicted. I wanted to talk to you," Maya said softly, her voice steady. Arthur swallowed hard. I owe you an apology, Maya. What I did to you, I don't have words for it. I can't begin to explain how wrong I was." Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at him, as if measuring his sincerity. She wasn't here to make him feel better. She was here to be heard. "I understand why you were angry," she said after a long pause. "I understand that you were just trying to protect your son, but you didn't give me a chance to explain. You didn't even listen to me." Arthur's heart sank at the truth in her words. I know, I wasn't thinking. I was too focused on what I thought was happening, not what actually was. I should have listened to you, Maya. I should have been more understanding. You saved my son's life, and I repaid you with anger and violence." Maya's expression softened slightly, but there was no forgiveness in her eyes. Not yet. She wasn't here for pity or words. She was here because, like him, she had a responsibility to Bryce, to the truth, and to herself. "You don't need to apologize to me," Maya replied, her voice firm. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Bryce needed help, and I gave it. But that doesn't mean what you did is okay. You need to understand that." Arthur nodded slowly, taking in her words. "I do understand, and I will do whatever it takes to make this right." Maya's gaze met his, and for the first time Arthur saw something in her eyes that he hadn't expected. Compassion. She wasn't angry anymore. She was simply tired of the weight of the situation and the pain of having been wronged. But in that moment, Arthur knew that this conversation was only the beginning. It wasn't just about apologizing, it was about rebuilding trust, about learning to see things from another perspective. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of that process. "I'm not leaving," Maya said, breaking the silence. "I'll stay. But if I'm going to be here, I need you to be different. I need you to let go of the anger, of the control. If you want to be a father to Bryce, you need to let someone else in. Someone who knows how to care for him, not just in theory but in practice." Arthur nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I will. I swear it." Maya hesitated before speaking again. "It's not about pride, Arthur. It's about love. And if you want Bryce to grow up in a home full of love, you need to stop hiding behind your pride." Arthur swallowed the lump in his throat. He had always believed that he had to be strong, that he had to keep everything under control. But Maya was right. Strength wasn't about control. It was about vulnerability, about being willing to listen, to change, and to love. "I'll do better," Arthur promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll be the father Bryce deserves." Maya nodded, her expression softening. "That's all I need." The awakening. The next few days at the Moore estate were a strange mix of silence and anticipation. Arthur seemed a different man. His usual cold demeanor had softened, and his sharp edges seemed dulled by the weight of his own guilt. He spoke less, but when he did, there was a hesitation in his voice that hadn't been there before. Maya could see it, the remorse, the regret, and perhaps even a flicker of understanding that he had been wrong. Bryce, oblivious to the turbulence surrounding him, had become the glue holding them all together. His tiny hands, grasping Maya's fingers as she fed him or rocked him to sleep, reminded everyone that life had a way of pushing through, even in the most difficult of times. He was the catalyst for change, even if he didn't know it yet. Maya had resolved to stay. The promise she had made to herself after Arthur's outburst, never to allow herself to be dismissed again, still echoed in her mind. She had taken care of Bryce because he needed her, but she had also needed him. In some way, caring for this child was a way to heal the old wounds she carried. She had lost a son, but in caring for Bryce, it felt like she was somehow giving life a second chance. But things weren't perfect. There was still tension between her and the other staff. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Some were of pity, others of judgment. They hadn't forgotten what had happened, and neither had she. The housekeepers, the butlers, the maids, they all looked at her differently now. She had crossed a line in their eyes, and while some tried to offer her small smiles, there was no mistaking the discomfort in their expressions. In their world, boundaries were not meant to be crossed. Maya couldn't help but notice the way Grace, one of the maids, kept her distance. Grace was the type of person who thrived on gossip and power, and Maya had always felt like she was beneath her. It was no surprise when Grace's sneering comments started to edge into Maya's personal space. Grace's voice was always too loud when she walked past Maya, always too biting in her remarks. "Must be nice," Grace had said one afternoon as Maya passed her in the hallway. "Getting so close to the baby. Makes you wonder if you're angling for something more than just a paycheck, doesn't it?" Maya kept her head down, pretending not to hear, but the words stung. It wasn't just jealousy, it was fear. Maya had dared to take a place in this family. She had stepped out of the role they had set for her. In their eyes, she was supposed to stay in the background, serving them in silence, not stepping into the emotional vacuum left by Claire's death. Arthur, on the other hand, had made it clear that he wasn't afraid to break with tradition. He had apologized to Maya for his behavior, but his apology had gone beyond words. He began to lean on her more, seeking her advice about Bryce's care, about how to handle the baby's feeding and sleeping schedules. It was clear that he was trying to change, trying to be more present, but Maya could see the struggle in him. He was still grieving. His wife's death had left a hole in his soul, one that no amount of work, wealth, or control could fill. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Arthur found Maya in the nursery standing by Bryce's crib. The baby was asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Arthur leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a moment before speaking. I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted softly. "This father thing, I'm still not sure I'm doing it right." Maya turned to him, her gaze steady but kind. "There's no perfect way to be a father, Arthur. You just do your best, and your best doesn't always look like someone else's best. It's about being there, being present." Arthur stepped into the room, his eyes searching the walls, the floor, anywhere but Maya. "I don't think I've been present enough. I've been so caught up in everything else, my company, my grief, the pressure of being the man of this house. I didn't notice that Bryce was suffering." Maya smiled, though there was sadness in her eyes. "You can't be perfect. No one is. But you can change. You can be better from here on out. And you have time to fix things. It's not too late." Arthur's gaze softened. He looked at Bryce for a moment before turning back to Maya. "You're right," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I need to be more present. I need to stop hiding behind my own pain." Maya nodded, her heart aching for him. She understood that pain too well. The loss of a loved one had a way of erasing everything: your identity, your sense of purpose, your ability to connect with others. But Arthur was finally starting to see that he wasn't alone in his grief. Maya, despite her own heartache, had found a way to connect with him through Bryce. That night, after the baby was settled, Maya and Arthur sat in the kitchen, sipping tea in silence. The weight of the past few days hung heavy in the air between them, but there was an unspoken understanding in their quiet companionship. They were both learning to move forward, together. It wasn't going to be easy. But Maya had learned the importance of persistence, of continuing, even when it felt like the world was falling apart. And Arthur, though he still wrestled with his inner demons, was starting to see that the most important thing he could do was love. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you," Arthur said suddenly, his voice low. "I should have listened to you. You were only trying to help." Maya's heart twisted. She could feel the sincerity in his words, but she also knew that apologies weren't enough. They had to rebuild, piece by piece. Trust couldn't be handed over like a gift. It had to be earned. And though it would take time, Maya was willing to try. For Bryce, for Arthur, for herself. "I know you're sorry," Maya replied softly, meeting his gaze. "But words only go so far. We have to show it through actions. And you'll have to prove to me and to Bryce that you're willing to be the father you want to be." Arthur nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I will. I promise." Maya looked away, her eyes resting on Bryce's peaceful form in the crib. "Good, because it's not just about what you want anymore. It's about what he needs, and what he needs is you." They sat together in the quiet of the kitchen, the sound of the wind howling outside the windows. The estate felt more alive now, even in its stillness. The pain was still there, lingering like a shadow, but it didn't have to define them anymore. The journey was far from over, but it was one they could walk together. Unspoken bonds. The days following the emotional confrontation with Arthur felt like a quiet turning point in Maya's life. The tension between them had not disappeared, but it had shifted. It was like the heavy air in the house had lightened just a fraction, allowing room for growth and understanding. But Maya knew, as much as she tried to convince herself, that this fragile peace could easily be shattered. The house was a pressure cooker, and the slightest misstep could set it all off again. Arthur, for his part, seemed committed to doing better. His interactions with Maya were respectful, and he made an effort to spend more time with Bryce. He began asking questions about the baby's routines, what he liked to eat, how to calm him when he cried, how to soothe him to sleep. At first, Maya had been hesitant to answer him, still raw from the slap and the harsh words. But over time, she realized that Arthur was making an effort to learn. He wasn't just doing it for appearances. He was genuinely trying to understand the responsibility of fatherhood. But even with all the changes, Maya couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. The whispers among the staff had only intensified, and every time she crossed paths with Grace, there was a palpable sense of judgment. It wasn't just about the incident anymore. It was about Maya's place in the household. She had crossed a boundary, had stepped out of the role they had assigned her as a maid. And now, she was seen as a threat. There was no going back to the way things had been before. One evening, as Maya walked down the hallway toward the nursery, she overheard a conversation between two of the housekeepers. They were talking in hushed tones, but Maya could still make out a few words. "I heard she's practically living in the nursery now," one said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Not just living in the nursery," the other replied, her tone harsh. "She's practically taken over. It's like she's trying to be his mother." Maya's stomach churned as she hurried past, trying to ignore the sting of their words. She had known this was coming, the judgment, the whispers, but it didn't make it any easier to bear. In the weeks that followed, Maya found herself spending more and more time in the nursery. She couldn't help it. It was where she felt most needed. Bryce was thriving under her care, his once frail body growing stronger with each passing day. The maternal instinct that had awakened in her after losing Elijah was undeniable. She loved this child, and she would do anything to protect him, even if it meant enduring the cold stares and judgment of the people around her. One afternoon, as she sat in the nursery with Bryce, she heard a soft knock on the door. She looked up to find Arthur standing in the doorway, his expression neutral, but his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. Maya hesitated for a moment but nodded. She stood up, carefully placing Bryce back into his crib, and walked over to him. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice cautious. Arthur stepped into the room, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked out the window for a moment before turning back to Maya. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice low. "About being a father. About not being enough for Bryce. I don't think I fully understood it until now, but I'm starting to get it." Maya raised an eyebrow, surprised by his words. "You're getting it now?" she asked, a touch of skepticism in her voice. Arthur nodded slowly. "I've been so caught up in my own guilt, my own pain. I've been hiding behind it, using it as an excuse. But I can't do that anymore. I can't keep running from what I've done." Maya looked at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But there was none. His words were raw, honest, and it seemed like he truly meant them. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he continued. "I just want to be there for Bryce. I want to be the father he deserves. And I know I can't do that if I keep pushing people away." Maya felt a flicker of something inside her. Maybe hope. Maybe the faintest sense of trust. She had been afraid that Arthur would never change, that his grief and pride would continue to shape his actions. But in this moment, she realized that change was possible. People could grow if they truly wanted to. "I'm not sure what that looks like yet," Arthur said quietly. "But I'll figure it out. I'm not giving up on Bryce. I'm not giving up on being a father." Maya nodded, her eyes softening. "It won't be easy. It never is." Arthur smiled faintly. "I know, but it's a start." The air in the room felt different now, lighter somehow. The tension that had been building between them for weeks was finally beginning to dissipate. Maya wasn't sure if this was the beginning of a real change in their relationship, but she knew that it was a step in the right direction. Later that evening, as Maya sat with Bryce, gently rocking him to sleep, she found herself thinking about her own journey. She had come a long way from the woman who had arrived at the Moore estate, uncertain and filled with her own grief. She had found purpose in caring for Bryce, in nurturing him, in being there for him when no one else could. But she had also found something else, something she hadn't expected. She had found a family, not the one she had lost, but a new one she hadn't asked for, but that she had come to care for in ways she couldn't have anticipated. She had built a bond with Bryce that transcended his role as the child of the wealthy Moore family. And she had forged a connection with Arthur, too, even if it was still fragile and untested. As Bryce's breathing slowed and he drifted off into a peaceful sleep, Maya felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future held for her, for Arthur, or for Bryce. But she knew one thing. She wasn't giving up on them. Not now. Not ever. In the coming days, Maya continued to care for Bryce as if he were her own. She made sure he was fed, comfortable, and happy. She continued to offer Arthur advice when he asked, always with the same sense of calm and compassion that had defined her since the day she first arrived at the estate. And slowly, things began to change. The whispers from the staff subsided, though they never fully disappeared. Grace, the most vocal critic of Maya's role in the house, began to keep her distance. Maya's position in the house had shifted, but not in the way anyone had expected. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She had become something more, someone whose presence was needed, whose care was irreplaceable. Arthur, too, began to change. He spent more time with Bryce, and Maya noticed that his demeanor had softened. He had learned to let go of some of the guilt that had held him captive for so long. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And as Maya watched Bryce grow stronger, healthier, and more vibrant with each passing day, she realized that she had done something remarkable, not just for him but for herself too. She had found a place where she was needed, a place where, for the first time in years, she truly belonged. The deepening rift. The days seemed to stretch on endlessly at the Moore estate, and for Maya, the distance between her and the rest of the household felt ever more palpable. While the emotional atmosphere had shifted in some ways, Arthur's attempts to rebuild his relationship with Bryce and his growing awareness of his failures as a father, Maya still found herself caught in the invisible web of tension woven by the other staff members. Though she had begun to earn Arthur's tentative trust, Maya knew it would take time for the others to truly accept her place in the household. The whispers hadn't stopped, and she could feel their weight, like an oppressive force surrounding her at every turn. They would never fully understand. They couldn't. Theirs was a world built on appearances, on social hierarchies and expectations, and Maya had crossed lines that could not be uncrossed. Grace in particular had become more and more unbearable to be around. Every time Maya walked past her, Grace would make sure to offer a pointed comment, something just sharp enough to sting, but not enough to warrant an open confrontation. Maya tried to ignore her, to rise above it, but the constant undercurrent of hostility was draining. "You know," Grace had said one afternoon as Maya passed her in the hallway, "it's funny how quickly things change. One day you're just here to clean, and the next you're practically a member of the family. A little too close to the baby, don't you think?" Maya had bitten her tongue to stop herself from responding. She had learned to pick her battles, and this wasn't one she was going to engage in. She was used to the judgment now, used to the whispers behind her back. But it didn't make it easier. It never did. The following evening, as the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Arthur approached Maya in the library. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, but the room felt cold, more like a place of business than a place of comfort. Arthur seemed lost in thought as he walked in, his usual composed demeanor faltering for just a moment before he steadied himself. "Maya," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "I need to talk to you." Maya looked up from the book she was reading, her eyebrows raised slightly in curiosity. "Of course, Mr. Moore. What's on your mind?" Arthur hesitated, standing by the window, his back to her. They've been difficult, haven't they?" His voice was a mix of guilt and uncertainty. "Between us, between you and the rest of the staff. I can see that." Maya closed the book slowly, leaning back in her chair. "You're right. It's not easy. I wish I could make it easier for you," Arthur said, turning to face her, his eyes filled with a weariness that seemed to stretch beyond the present. "I know I can't change everything overnight, but I want you to know that I see what you're doing. You're caring for Bryce. You're doing what no one else could, and I appreciate it more than you know." Maya felt a flicker of warmth inside her chest at his words. It wasn't often that Arthur expressed gratitude, and even more rarely did he show any vulnerability. But she knew that this was a turning point for him. He was finally acknowledging the truth that Maya's role in this household had grown into something far greater than what anyone had initially imagined. "I'm just doing my job," Maya replied, her voice calm and steady. "You hired me to care for Bryce, and that's what I'm doing." Arthur's eyes met hers, and for the first time Maya saw something raw in his gaze. "It's not just about the job, Maya. You've given Bryce more than just care. You've given him love. I've seen it in the way he looks at you. It's like he knows you're the one who's been there for him, and I don't know if I've ever properly thanked you for that." Maya looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity of the conversation. There's no need for thanks, Arthur. Bryce is my responsibility, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he's safe and healthy. I know, Arthur said softly, almost as if to himself. But I need to do more, for both of you. This situation has gone on long enough. The tension in the house, the way people look at you, it's not right. Maya felt a tightening in her chest. She had expected this. Arthur was good at making promises, but promises were often empty words unless followed by real change. She had seen that before, in her own life, with people who promised her the world but never delivered. She couldn't afford to believe in words alone. I appreciate your concern, Maya said, her voice guarded. But words don't change things, Arthur. Actions do. Arthur nodded, taking a step closer to her. I know that, and I'm going to do everything I can to make this right. For you, for Bryce, and for the people who are watching this from the sidelines. Grace, in particular, has been difficult, hasn't she? Maya's eyes narrowed at the mention of Grace. Difficult is an understatement. Arthur's expression hardened. I'll handle it. I'll make sure she knows her place. This is my house, and I'll be damned if anyone tries to undermine the peace we're trying to build. Maya felt a surge of gratitude for his words. But she also knew that it would take more than just Arthur's promises to make Grace, or anyone else, respect her position in the house. She had come to realize that respect was something she had to earn every single day. It wasn't something that could be handed over easily, no matter how much Arthur tried to intervene. I'm not asking for special treatment, Arthur, Maya said quietly. I'm not here to be treated differently from anyone else. I just want peace. I just want to do my job without feeling like I'm constantly under a microscope. Arthur seemed to contemplate her words for a moment before he spoke again. I understand, and I will do what I can to make sure that happens. But I need you to trust me, Maya. I need you to trust that I'll do right by you. Not just because you're here for Bryce, but because you deserve it. Maya nodded slowly, a sense of cautious hope creeping into her heart. She had been through too much to simply trust on the word of others, especially in a place like this, where appearances mattered more than anything else. But Arthur was offering something she hadn't expected: sincerity. She wasn't sure how long it would last, but for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. I'll trust you, Maya said, her voice low but steady. But it will take time. Arthur smiled, a small but genuine expression that softened his features. I'm not asking for anything more than that. As they sat there in the quiet of the library, Maya felt the weight of the moment settle over her. There were still so many unanswered questions, so much left unsaid, but for the first time since she had arrived at the Moore estate, she felt like she had a chance at something better, something real. But as she looked at Arthur, she knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust was a fragile thing, and it took years to build but could be destroyed in an instant. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she was ready to find out. For herself, for Bryce, for the family that, against all odds, she had started to care for. The moment of truth. A few weeks had passed since the conversation in the library, and the atmosphere in the Moore household had changed. There was still an underlying tension, but it was different now, less about Maya's presence and more about the healing that was slowly beginning to take place. The cracks in Arthur's grief, though deep, were beginning to show signs of repair. Maya, too, had found a strange comfort in the routine of caring for Bryce, the baby who had become the center of her world. Bryce was thriving. His laughter echoed throughout the house, his tiny hands gripping at everything around him with an innocent curiosity. Maya couldn't help but smile when he smiled, couldn't help but feel her heart swell every time he reached out for her. It wasn't just that she cared for him, it was that she loved him. The maternal instinct that had awakened after losing Elijah had found new life in this little boy. But not everyone shared in the same quiet optimism. Maya could feel the whispers around her still, though they were more subdued now. Grace, for one, had continued to keep her distance, her demeanor colder, sharper than ever. Maya noticed the way Grace avoided eye contact whenever they passed each other in the hallways. It wasn't the kind of tension that was easy to ignore. There was a palpable sense of disdain that Maya couldn't shake. But Grace wasn't the only one who had started to show signs of change. Maya noticed subtle shifts in the staff's behavior. The housekeepers, who once glared at her as she walked by, had begun to greet her with more politeness. The butlers, who had once treated her as little more than invisible, were now careful with their words, mindful of their tone. It wasn't as if they had suddenly accepted her, but the undercurrent of hostility had begun to shift. Slowly, things were starting to change. It was a crisp morning when Maya first realized just how much had changed. She had been up early, preparing Bryce's bottle in the kitchen, when Arthur walked in. He was dressed in a suit, his tie neatly fastened, but there was something about him, something softer that Maya hadn't noticed before. He looked human in a way he hadn't before. "Maya," he said, his voice more gentle than usual. "Can we talk?" Maya turned around, wiping her hands on a towel, surprised by the sudden invitation. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Arthur hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking down to the table before meeting hers again. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done. For Bryce. For me. I don't know if I've ever truly said it, but I'm grateful." Maya's heart clenched at his words, but she didn't let it show. She had heard similar things before, apologies and gratitude that never truly held weight. She had been here long enough to know that actions spoke louder than words. But something in his expression made her pause. Maybe this time it was different. Maybe, just maybe, he meant it. "I'm just doing my job, Arthur," Maya replied softly, not wanting to get caught up in an emotional exchange. She had learned to keep her distance, to not allow herself to be swept away by empty promises. "You don't need to thank me." But Arthur shook his head, his jaw tight. "No, Maya, it's more than that. You've been here for Bryce when I couldn't be. You've been there when I was too lost in my own pain to see what was right in front of me. I didn't know how much I needed you until now." Maya swallowed, her chest tight. The vulnerability in his voice was something she hadn't expected, and yet, despite herself, she found herself touched by his words. This wasn't just an apology, it was an acknowledgement of everything that had transpired, an acknowledgement of her worth. "I don't need anything from you, Arthur," Maya said, her voice steady, though she could feel the emotion welling up inside her. "I'm not here for you to make it right. I'm here for Bryce. I'm here for him." Arthur's gaze softened, and for a moment there was a flicker of understanding between them. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to bridge the gap that had existed between them for so long. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I'll never be able to make up for the things I've done, but I'll try. I'll try to be better, for you, for Bryce." Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure how much she believed him. There had been too many broken promises, too many lies and disappointments, for her to blindly accept what he was saying. But still, something in his eyes told her that he was finally starting to see the truth. Later that day, Maya found herself once again in the nursery, tending to Bryce as he played with his toys. His little giggles filled the room, a sound that made her heart ache with a bittersweet tenderness. She had come to love this child with a depth she hadn't expected. It was as if Bryce had filled the empty spaces left by the loss of her own son. In his innocent joy, she found a reason to keep going, but the reality of the situation was never far from her mind. Even though things had improved with Arthur, there was still the matter of the rest of the household. There was still Grace and the others who viewed her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong. And while Maya had learned to put up with the subtle disdain, it wasn't something she could ignore forever. That evening, after Bryce had been tucked into bed and the house had quieted down, Maya sat in the kitchen, sipping a cup of tea. She was lost in her thoughts when she heard a soft knock on the door. "May I come in?" Eleanor's voice came through the door, calm and steady, as always. Maya set her cup down and walked over to let her in. "Of course, Eleanor." Eleanor stepped inside, her gaze thoughtful as she surveyed the room. "I wanted to check in on you," she said softly, her voice gentle. "I know things have been difficult lately, and I just wanted to make sure you're all right." Maya smiled faintly. "I'm fine, just tired." Eleanor nodded, her eyes studying Maya with a knowing look. "You've been through more than most people could bear, but I can see that you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Maya lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. She wasn't sure if she was strong or if she was just surviving. The truth was, she had always been resilient. But there were days when the weight of everything, the whispers, the judgment, the isolation, felt too much to carry. "I've been thinking about how you've been treated here," Eleanor continued, her voice steady. "I know it hasn't been easy, but you need to know that you have a place here, not just as Bryce's caregiver, but as someone who deserves to be treated with respect." Maya looked up at her, surprised by her words. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean that you're more than just someone who takes care of the baby. You're a part of this family. You've been a part of it from the moment you walked in. And I see that now. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. Not Grace, not anyone." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't sure if it was the weight of Eleanor's words or the emotional toll of everything that had happened, but she suddenly felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't think I've ever really felt like I belong here. But maybe I can start believing that I do." Eleanor smiled, a soft, understanding expression crossing her face. "You do, Maya, and don't forget it." As Eleanor left the room, Maya felt a shift in herself. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had the strength to face it. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. For Bryce, for herself, and for the family she had begun to care for, she would keep moving forward, one step at a time, uncovering the past. The days that followed Maya's conversation with Eleanor felt oddly quiet, almost as if the house itself was waiting for something, or perhaps for someone, to step forward and take charge of the fragmented truths that had long been buried within these walls. Maya, for the first time, felt as though the burden wasn't entirely hers to carry. Eleanor's words had given her an unexpected sense of peace, and Arthur's apology had opened up a path that she wasn't sure she could walk before. But now, there was a deep yearning within her, something stirring that she couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't just about Bryce anymore. It wasn't even just about her role in the house. It was about something deeper, something that had always lurked in the shadows of the Moore family's past, waiting to be unearthed. That afternoon, as she walked through the hallways of the estate, her mind kept returning to the photographs she had found in the attic, the ones of Edward, and the strange, haunting silence that seemed to follow him. He had been hidden, erased from history, but not forgotten. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that there were still pieces of the puzzle left to find, pieces that would explain the fractured legacy of the Moore family and why they had been so intent on silencing everything that didn't fit their perfect image. As if on cue, Maya heard a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Arthur standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Maya nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The room, with its dim lighting and comfortable furnishings, felt almost out of place now. It had been her sanctuary for a while, but in that moment, it felt like another layer of the facade that the Moore family had created over the years. "Is everything okay?" Maya asked, her voice steady but curious. She wasn't sure what to expect. Arthur had been quieter these last few days, almost introspective. It was as though he was grappling with something inside himself. I need to show you something," he said, hesitating for a moment before stepping further into the room. "I wasn't sure how to bring it up, but I think you're the only one who can help me understand it." Maya raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Arthur walked over to the desk where a large, leather-bound folder sat, its edges worn with age. He picked it up, placing it gently in front of her. "This is part of the paperwork that I've been sorting through for the family trust," he said. "It's a file on my brother Edward, but it's not what I expected." Maya felt a tightness in her chest at the mention of Edward. She'd been digging for answers about him, trying to piece together the fragments of his existence that had been hidden for so long. But hearing Arthur speak his name with such a pained expression made something shift inside her. "What's in it?" Maya asked carefully. Arthur hesitated, his fingers tracing the edges of the folder. "I never knew about this," he murmured. "I didn't know what my father had done. Not until now." He opened the folder and pulled out a few crumpled papers, scanning them briefly before looking back at Maya. His eyes were filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. There were payments, not just to the doctors, but to a private facility, a place that wasn't listed on any of the public records, and there were instructions. Instructions to keep Edward's existence a secret. Maya felt a rush of shock, her breath catching in her throat. This was it, the smoking gun she had been waiting for. She leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest as Arthur continued. "They didn't want anyone to know," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "My father, the whole damn family. They made sure that Edward was erased. They didn't care about him. They didn't care what happened to him." Arthur slammed the folder down on the desk, his face flushed with frustration. "I don't understand how they could do this, how they could just throw him away like he was nothing." Maya's mind raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when the truth would finally be brought to light. But it wasn't enough just to have the pieces. They needed to be put together, and they needed to be shared. "I know you're angry," Maya said softly. "But this is what you need to fix. This is the truth. This is the part of your family's past that has been hidden for too long, and it's up to you to decide what to do with it." Arthur looked at her, his expression torn. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to deal with this. All this time I've been living in the shadow of a lie. How do I fix that?" Maya stood, walking over to where Arthur was standing. She placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him a small but sincere smile. "You start by telling the truth. You start by owning it. It won't be easy, but it's the only way to break free from the past. For you, for Edward, for your family." Arthur nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "I can't do this alone," he said quietly. "I need your help." Maya's heart swelled with understanding. "You won't be alone, Arthur. You never were." The weight of the conversation hung in the air, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence that had filled the house for years. It was a different kind of quiet, one filled with potential, with the promise of a future built on honesty and redemption. Maya knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt like the Moores were ready to face the truth. Arthur looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you, Maya. I don't know what I would have done without you." Maya smiled, her eyes soft. "You don't need to thank me. You're doing the hard work. I'm just here to help you see it through." And with that, the road ahead seemed a little clearer. There were still battles to be fought, and the past would never be fully erased. But with the truth finally starting to come to light, Maya felt a new sense of purpose, a sense that she wasn't just caring for Bryce anymore. She was helping the Moore family heal. She was helping them rewrite their history. As the evening faded into night, Maya couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a prison of secrets. It felt like a place where truth could grow, a place where healing could begin. The price of truth. As the days went by, Maya could feel the steady change in the house. It wasn't dramatic or immediate, but it was there, slowly creeping into the very foundation of the Moore estate. The truth had been unearthed, and although the family hadn't fully embraced it, there was a shift in the air. Arthur was no longer the stoic, emotionally distant man he once was. He was different now, vulnerable, remorseful, and willing to face the consequences of his actions. But the hardest part, the part Maya had feared, was still to come, exposing the truth to the rest of the world. The folder Arthur had shown her, filled with documents and hidden payments, was only the beginning. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many pieces of the puzzle that needed to be put together. But Maya couldn't deny the gravity of what they had uncovered. Arthur's father had gone to great lengths to erase Edward from existence, and that kind of secrecy had long-lasting effects. For days, Maya and Arthur worked together, poring over the documents, the hidden notes, and the files. Each page revealed something new, something that made the betrayal feel even more profound. Arthur had no idea how deep the deception ran until he saw it all laid out in front of him. There were mentions of blackmail, coercion, and threats, things that even Maya, who had lived through her own share of hardships, found hard to comprehend. Maya couldn't help but think back to her own experiences with secrecy. She had lived a life filled with hidden truths, secrets about her past, about her family, and about the loss of her own child. She understood the weight of carrying a secret, of having a part of yourself buried and locked away. But what Arthur's family had done was something else entirely. They hadn't just hidden the truth. They had tried to destroy it. The impact of that realization hit Arthur harder than Maya had anticipated. One evening, after a long day of going through the files, he sat down in the library, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring blankly at the fireplace. Maya entered quietly, unsure of what to say. She had seen Arthur in many moods, angry, frustrated, even grief-stricken, but this was different. This was the look of a man who had come face to face with his own demons. "You're carrying a heavy load, Arthur," Maya said softly, stepping into the room. "I know it's hard, but you don't have to do this alone." Arthur didn't respond at first. He simply stared into the fire, the flickering flames reflecting in his tired eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. "I don't know how to fix this, Maya. I don't know how to make up for all the years I wasted, pretending that everything was fine, pretending I didn't know what was happening to Edward." Maya took a seat beside him, offering him a quiet presence, a sense of solidarity. "You can't change the past," she said gently, "but you can change the future. You can make it right in the ways that matter." Arthur looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and despair. "I've tried to fix things in the past. I thought I could fix my mistakes, but all I've done is make it worse. My family, they'll never forgive me." Maya reached out and placed a hand on his. "Arthur, forgiveness isn't something you can demand from others. It's something you have to earn. And it starts with you." Arthur nodded slowly, taking a deep breath as if trying to gather his thoughts. "I want to make things right. I want to expose the truth. But I'm scared. Scared of what it will do to this family, to Bryce, to everything I've built." Maya met his gaze, her voice steady and reassuring. "The truth is never easy, but it's the only thing that will set you free. It's the only thing that will allow you to move forward. You can't live in fear of what might happen. You have to face it, head on." Arthur's hand tightened around his glass, his knuckles pale. "But what if it destroys everything? What if this family, my legacy, my business, it all falls apart?" Maya smiled gently. "Arthur, a legacy built on lies is no legacy at all. You can't keep hiding behind a mask of perfection. People will respect you more if you stand in the truth, no matter how difficult it is." He was silent for a long moment, his thoughts clearly racing. Finally, he set his glass down and met Maya's eyes. "I'm scared, but I can't keep running from this. I have to face the truth, and I'll need your help." Maya gave him a nod of understanding. "I'm with you, Arthur. Every step of the way." The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, public statements, and press conferences. The news about Edward's disappearance and the Moore family's attempt to bury his existence began to spread, first through whispers and then through full-fledged media coverage. Arthur and Maya had agreed that the truth needed to be shared, not just for Edward's sake, but for the sake of everyone who had ever been silenced by the family's power and influence. It wasn't easy. The press was relentless, and the public had their own ideas about what should happen next. But as the truth came to light, Maya saw the impact it had on the people around her. The staff at the Moore estate began to change their attitudes, their behavior shifting from suspicion to cautious respect. The community started to take notice, and Maya began to receive letters from people who had been affected by the same kind of silencing, the same kind of erasure. And then came the day of the public memorial for Edward. It was a somber event, but it was also a moment of healing. Arthur stood beside Maya and Edward, a man who had finally reclaimed his name, his legacy, and his life. The ceremony was small but powerful, filled with people who had come to show their support for the Moore family, for Claire, and for the truth that had been buried for so long. As the memorial concluded, Arthur stood before the crowd, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is not just a memorial for my brother," he said. "This is a testament to the power of truth. A reminder that no one should ever be erased, no matter the circumstances. This is for all those who have been silenced, and this is for my family, who will never be the same again. Maya watched him as he spoke, feeling a surge of pride and relief. The road had been long and difficult, but they had made it. The truth was no longer a secret, and Arthur had finally come to terms with his past. She glanced at Bryce, who was playing nearby, oblivious to the weight of the moment. For him, the future was bright, full of promise and possibility. And Maya, as she stood there, knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for the Moore family, for Edward, and for herself. The truth had set them all free. Rebuilding bridges. The days after the memorial were quiet, but charged with a new energy. The air at the Moore estate felt different, as if the house itself had breathed a collective sigh of relief. For the first time in a long time, the estate was no longer a place full of secrets. The walls, once heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, now seemed to hold a promise of renewal. It wasn't an instant transformation, but a subtle shift that Maya could feel with every step she took inside the house. Arthur was quieter than usual, but there was a calmness to him now, a stark contrast to the man who had been consumed by grief and guilt just months ago. Maya noticed the change in him, but she also noticed that he wasn't the only one who had transformed. The staff at the estate, who had once looked at her with suspicion, were now more respectful, more willing to listen. There was a palpable sense of change in the house, a sense that everyone was slowly beginning to understand what it meant to live with truth. But for Maya, the change was more personal. She had been a part of this family for months, but now, after everything that had happened, it felt like she truly belonged. The truth had come to light, and she had become an integral part of that process. In her own quiet way, Maya had rewritten the course of the Moore family's history. She had been the catalyst for change, for healing, and for forgiveness. And in doing so, she had found a new sense of purpose, one that didn't just revolve around caring for Bryce, but also around helping the Moore family heal from the damage their past had caused. One evening, Maya found herself in the nursery with Bryce. He had grown stronger, his eyes brighter, his laughter more frequent. Maya rocked him gently, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and gratitude. He had been the light that had guided her through the darkest days, the reason she had stayed, the reason she had fought so hard. Arthur had come a long way. He had apologized, yes, but his actions were what truly spoke volumes. He had made the hard decisions, exposing the truth, taking responsibility, and offering support to those who needed it most. But Maya couldn't deny that there was still a gap between them, a lingering distance. He had made strides, but there was still more to be done. And Maya wasn't sure what the future would hold for her and Arthur. Would they remain in this strange, newfound harmony? Or would the weight of their past, both personal and familial, drive a wedge between them once again? As Maya sat there in the nursery, her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Eleanor standing in the doorway, her silver hair gleaming in the dim light. There was a look of quiet wisdom in her eyes, a depth of experience that Maya had come to respect. "May I join you?" Eleanor asked, her voice gentle. Maya smiled and nodded. "Of course." Eleanor walked in slowly, her steps measured, as though she were walking into a sacred space. She stood beside Maya, looking down at Bryce with a mixture of affection and contemplation. "He's growing up so fast," Eleanor murmured, her eyes softening as she watched the child in Maya's arms. Maya nodded. "He is. Every day he's becoming a little more independent, a little more aware of the world around him." Eleanor watched him for a moment longer before speaking again. "You've done more for this family than anyone could have asked, Maya." Maya glanced up at Eleanor, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "I was just doing what felt right." "I know," Eleanor said, her voice tinged with a quiet strength. "But that doesn't change the fact that you've brought a kind of healing to this house, a healing that none of us could have achieved on our own." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. She had been so focused on the immediate needs of the family, on the baby, on the truth. She hadn't realized just how much of an impact her presence had made. "I just wanted to make things right," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want anyone to feel like they had to carry their pain alone anymore. Eleanor reached out and placed a hand gently on Maya's arm. You've given us all a gift, Maya. You've reminded us that we don't have to be bound by our past. We can rebuild, we can move forward. But it starts with us being honest with each other, and with ourselves. Maya nodded, the weight of Eleanor's words sinking in. She had never imagined that she would be the one to help this family heal. But now, looking at Bryce and hearing Eleanor's praise, she realized that perhaps she had played a part in something far bigger than herself. The Moore family was no longer just a legacy of wealth and power. It was a family that could rebuild itself, starting with the truth. In the days that followed, the change in the house became more noticeable. Arthur continued his work, but now, instead of keeping his grief and guilt buried deep inside, he was learning to share it. He was open with Maya about his struggles, his fears, and his uncertainties. There was no longer a wall between them. It was as though they were both finally seeing each other for who they truly were, flawed, imperfect, but capable of growth. And while Arthur was still grappling with his past, Maya knew that he was on the right path. He was learning to face the things he had buried for so long, and he was learning to accept responsibility for his actions. It wasn't easy for him. There were moments when he faltered, moments when he wanted to retreat back into the old ways of thinking. But Maya could see that he was trying, and that, she realized, was all that mattered. But even as the Moore family began to heal, Maya couldn't ignore the lingering doubts that crept into her mind. The family was changing, but was it enough? Could they really rebuild everything that had been broken? And where did that leave her? What was her place in this new dynamic? She couldn't deny the bond she had with Bryce, but what about the rest of the family? Would they continue to accept her as one of their own, or would she always be an outsider, someone who had stepped into their world and shaken everything up? Maya didn't have all the answers. But as she looked down at Bryce, his small hands reaching out to her, she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going anywhere. For the first time in a long time, Maya felt like she was where she was meant to be, and no matter what the future held, she would face it with the same strength, the same conviction that had brought her this far. The call to action. Maya had always believed that the most powerful change came when a person was willing to confront their deepest fears. It wasn't just about facing the truth, it was about acting on it, doing something with the knowledge, the pain, and the remorse. In the days after the memorial, as the Moore family continued to navigate their way through the tumult of their past, Maya couldn't help but wonder how much further they could go. The house had become quieter, more reflective, as though everyone was deep in thought, trying to figure out what came next. Arthur was often in his study, going through the details of the family trust, trying to figure out how to repair the damage done to Edward's legacy and whether he could ever redeem himself in the eyes of his late wife, Claire. Eleanor, though seemingly content, had a quiet intensity about her, as though she knew more than she was letting on. And then there was Maya, trying to carve out her place in this family, trying to reconcile her role as the caregiver, the truth-bearer, and now, it seemed, the catalyst for this family's transformation. As she walked through the halls of the estate, she felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The family had started to rebuild, yes, but there was something unfinished about it. The truth was out, but it still felt like there was so much more to uncover. Maya's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the phone, its persistent ringing breaking the stillness of the house. She looked at the caller ID and saw that it was from the attorney she had reached out to several weeks earlier. A sense of urgency filled her as she answered the call. "Maya," the lawyer's voice was sharp but kind. "I think you need to come in. We've found something significant." Her heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, her pulse quickening. "There's a document, one that was sealed, kept from the public eye. It's about your involvement with the Moore estate, about your role in uncovering the truth. You need to come in and see it for yourself. It's a game changer." Maya's mind raced. This could be the breakthrough they needed. She had known there were deeper layers to the story, but she hadn't expected this. "I'll be there as soon as I can," she said, already moving toward the door. The drive to the lawyer's office was a blur. Maya's thoughts were a jumble of possibilities. What could they have found? Was it more evidence that would finally bring the family's past to light? Or was it something entirely new, something that could change everything again? As she entered the office, the air seemed to buzz with anticipation. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with sharp features and a calm demeanor, stood up as she entered, holding a thick manila envelope in his hands. "Maya," he said quietly, gesturing for her to sit. "I think you're going to want to see this." She sat down across from him, her hands trembling as she reached for the envelope. The lawyer opened it slowly, and as he pulled out the papers, Maya's breath caught in her throat. The document was a legal contract, signed and dated with a series of names, one of which was unmistakably her own. "What is this?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a formal agreement. It seems your role in the Moore estate wasn't just a temporary position, Maya," the lawyer said, glancing at her with a look of realization. "This document outlines a legally binding agreement, one that would have given you full custody of the Moore estate, along with all the assets had you agreed to it." Maya felt her world tilt on its axis. She took a deep breath and stared at the paper in front of her. "Why was this hidden?" she asked, feeling the weight of her own name staring back at her. The lawyer sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It seems your involvement wasn't as accidental as it seemed. Claire Moore had made arrangements before she passed. She wanted to ensure that someone who understood the family's past, and who wasn't tied to their wealth, would have a hand in its future. The family was supposed to be made aware of this, but it was hidden, likely out of fear of how it would change things, especially with Arthur being in charge." Maya's thoughts raced. She had never asked for this. She had never sought power or control over the estate. Her role had always been about caring for Bryce, about helping a grieving family heal. But this was something else entirely. "This changes everything," she whispered. "Why would Claire leave this to me?" The lawyer glanced at her, a slight furrow in his brow. "Because she believed in you. She believed that you would be the one to make things right. The Moore family has a legacy of power and silence, but Claire knew that it was someone like you, a woman who had lived through loss, through hardship, and who understood the weight of truth, that could bring change to this house." Maya felt a shiver run through her. She had never known Claire Moore, but somehow Claire had seen her, had known the kind of person she was. It was both humbling and overwhelming to think that the woman she had cared for had trusted her with this kind of responsibility. This is too much," Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't want this. I never asked for it. I came here to help. I came here because of Bryce. This isn't about power for me." The lawyer nodded, his expression understanding. "I know, Maya, but you have to realize that you now have a chance to reshape this family's future. You don't have to accept it, but you need to know that you have the option. You could help Arthur and the family move forward, to rebuild and create something meaningful. You could be the one to make the changes that need to happen." Maya sat back in her chair, the weight of the decision settling over her. She thought about Bryce, about the future she wanted to build for him, and about the family she had grown to care for. The Moores had been through so much, but they were finally on the path to healing. Did she want to become a part of that, or did she want to step away and leave them to face their past without her? Her mind swirled with possibilities, but one thing was clear. This was no longer just about what was right for her. It was about what was right for the future of the Moore family, for the future of Bryce, and for the legacy they would leave behind. Maya took a deep breath, looking at the document one more time. She knew the decision would not be easy, and it would change everything. But she also knew that she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when the truth had come to light, and not when the future was hers to shape. "Let's do it," Maya said finally, her voice resolute. "Let's make sure this family's future is one built on truth, on redemption, and on healing. I'm ready." The lawyer smiled, nodding with approval. "I thought you might say that." I'd say, as Maya left the office, the weight of the decision hung heavy on her shoulders. But for the first time, she felt sure of her place in the story of the Moore family. This was no longer about being a caregiver or an outsider. This was about becoming a part of something bigger, something that could change the course of history for the better. And she was ready to take that step. Facing the past. The decision Maya made that day was more than just about a piece of paper. It was a commitment to herself, to her future, and to the family she had unexpectedly come to love. Arthur was still reeling from the aftermath of everything he'd discovered about his family's past, but Maya knew one thing for sure. She could no longer sit on the sidelines, watching them slowly unravel. It was time to face the past, truly face it, and move forward together. The days following the revelation of Claire's secret legacy were filled with logistical steps. Maya began to see her role with the Moore family shifting from that of a caretaker to that of a leader in their rehabilitation. There were meetings with lawyers, financial planners, and public relations experts, all of whom worked diligently to figure out the best way to proceed with the Moore estate's future. The family's business was at a crossroads, and its legacy, once marred by silence, was now in the open for the world to see. Arthur was often on edge. His usual calm, collected demeanor was slowly being replaced by something rawer, more vulnerable. He'd always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his life, especially his family's wealth. But now, he was learning that control meant little when it came to healing deep wounds. Maya observed him closely, seeing him attempt to hold on to the old ways of running things, stoic, detached, with an air of authority. But every now and then, she saw glimpses of the man beneath the layers of corporate armor. A man who felt guilt, who was unsure, who was still mourning the loss of his wife and, in many ways, the loss of the life he thought he had built. It wasn't just Arthur's transformation that Maya noticed, though. The house itself was changing. It was a subtle shift, one that didn't have a clear definition, but it was there. The once cold, imposing walls that had witnessed decades of silence seemed to be exhaling, loosening their grip. The servants, who had once walked the halls like shadows, began to speak more freely. The air felt less heavy, less burdened by the past. People were beginning to acknowledge each other, not just as servants and employers, but as human beings, equal in their struggles. And then there was the most significant change of all, the transformation in the way Bryce was raised. Maya had been his caretaker for months, but now, as she took on this new role, she realized how deeply connected she had become to him. It wasn't just about feeding him, soothing him, and watching over him anymore. It was about being the one to show him what true love and responsibility meant. He was the legacy that mattered now. The past was something that could be examined, faced, and even forgiven. But the future, his future, was something Maya had to protect at all costs. One evening, as Maya was putting Bryce to bed, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She had entered this house as an outsider, a maid with no intention of becoming involved in the family's personal affairs. But now, here she was, with a future inextricably linked to the Moore family's fate. What had once felt like a simple act of kindness had turned into a deep responsibility, one that would require everything she had to give. As she tucked Bryce in, his tiny body shifting restlessly in the sheets, Maya smiled to herself. He had grown so much since the first day she had held him in her arms. He no longer looked frail and vulnerable. Now he was a healthy, curious little boy with a world of possibilities ahead of him. Maya had done that. She had helped him survive, and now she had the chance to give him a life free of the mistakes that had haunted his family. Just as she was about to leave the nursery, Arthur appeared in the doorway. He looked tired, the weight of the day's meeting still on his shoulders, but his eyes softened when he saw Maya with Bryce. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a bond formed in the fires of shared grief and mutual respect. "I thought I might find you here," Arthur said quietly, stepping into the room. "How's he doing?" Maya smiled softly, looking down at Bryce, who had finally fallen into a peaceful sleep. "He's fine. He's always fine when I'm with him." Arthur nodded, his gaze lingering on Bryce for a moment before turning back to Maya. "I've been thinking about what we talked about earlier," he said, his voice laced with an unfamiliar hesitation. "About the future, about what comes next for all of us." Maya looked up at him, her heart pounding with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. "What do you mean?" "I don't think I can do this alone anymore," Arthur confessed, his voice breaking just slightly. "I've spent so much of my life thinking I had to control everything, to keep things in check, but it's never worked. Not with Bryce, not with this family, not even with myself. I need you, Maya." Her breath caught in her chest. She had known that their relationship had grown into something deeper, something more important than just a caretaker and employer. But hearing Arthur admit it so openly felt like a turning point. A small part of her had always been afraid that she would be asked to leave once the truth was out, once the family had made peace with their past. But now, it seemed that her place in the Moore family was no longer in question. "I'm here," she said, her voice steady. "I've always been here." Arthur met her gaze, his eyes filled with a new sense of resolve. "Then let's do this together. Let's build something better, something we can all be proud of." Maya didn't respond immediately, but as she looked at him, she saw the man he was becoming. He wasn't the same person who had stormed into the nursery all those weeks ago, furious and afraid. He had changed, and it wasn't just because of the truth that had come to light. He had changed because he was finally ready to face the consequences of his actions, and he was willing to walk the path of redemption, not just for himself, but for the family he had once taken for granted. "We'll rebuild," Maya finally said, her voice firm with conviction, "but it's not just about the estate or the money. It's about what we can do for the people who have been silenced, who have been erased. We owe it to them, and to ourselves, to make sure we're not just fixing what's broken. We have to build something new." Arthur nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I agree. And maybe it starts with us. Maybe it starts with me." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of the promise they were making to each other. "It starts with all of us," she said, a sense of determination in her voice. "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future." For the first time in a long time, Maya felt the weight of her decision lift. She was no longer an outsider, no longer just a caretaker. She was a part of something much larger, and together they would face the future, not with fear, but with hope. The truth unveiled. Maya stood by the window, her gaze drifting over the sprawling estate that had become both her home and her battleground. The Moore family had been embroiled in a web of secrets and lies for decades, but now, after so much hardship, the veil was lifting. What had once been hidden was now being uncovered, one painful truth at a time. And as Maya watched Bryce play in the garden, running around with the same joy she had seen when he was a newborn, she couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for the rest of the family to truly heal. Arthur had come a long way since the day he had slapped Maya in anger, still reeling from the loss of his wife and his son's near-death experience. The road to redemption was long, but Arthur was finally on the path to understanding that leadership wasn't about control. It was about listening, about embracing the truth, and about being vulnerable enough to face the mistakes of the past. But for Maya, the truth was something deeper than just the lies within the Moore family. It was about her own past, about what she had been running from for so long. She had never planned on becoming involved in the complexities of the Moore family. She had simply come here to work, to care for Bryce, and to keep her own heart safe. But now, as she watched Arthur struggle with his own guilt, she realized that perhaps her own healing journey was intertwined with this family's. There was a soft knock on the door, pulling her out of her thoughts. She turned to see Arthur standing there, his eyes soft but tired, a quiet desperation in them that she hadn't seen in weeks. "Maya," he said, his voice gentle. "Can we talk?" Maya nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "Of course," she replied, her heart already picking up speed. This conversation felt important, like it could be a turning point. Arthur stepped into the room, his hands shoved into his pockets as he seemed to gather his thoughts. He had been doing that a lot lately, thinking before speaking, choosing his words carefully as though trying to unlearn old habits. "Maya," he began again, "I've been thinking about everything. About how I treated you, how I treated this whole situation. I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But beyond that, I've come to realize something. Something I wasn't willing to face before." Maya watched him intently, waiting for the words she knew were coming. "I've spent so much of my life chasing success," he continued, his eyes meeting hers with a newfound sincerity. "But in doing that, I forgot what it meant to truly live. I forgot the importance of family, of love. I forgot that being a father means being present, not just financially, but emotionally, mentally. and I've lost so much because of that." Maya could feel the weight of his words settle in the room. She had seen this transformation in him already, but hearing him say it out loud made it all the more real. He wasn't just apologizing for his actions. He was acknowledging the profound impact they had on the people around him, especially on the family he had built and neglected for so long. "I can't change the past, Maya," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "But I can be here now. I can be the man that Bryce deserves. I can be the father I've failed to be." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. For all the anger she had felt in the past, for all the time she had questioned her place in this family, she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about understanding. Understanding that people made mistakes, that they hurt each other, but that there was always room for change. And most importantly, there was always room for healing. She walked toward him slowly, her voice soft but firm. "Arthur, no one expects perfection from you. Not me, not Bryce, not anyone. What matters now is what you do next. You've already started on the right path. You've started listening, and that's what Bryce needs. That's what this family needs." Arthur nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've failed you, Maya. I've failed everyone here, but I'm willing to try. I want to make things right. I don't want this family to keep living in the shadow of the past. I don't want Bryce to grow up thinking that love means silence, that silence means strength. He needs to know that it's okay to speak the truth, even when it's hard." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a gentle squeeze. "We're going to do this together, Arthur. It's not going to be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but we'll rebuild. We'll create something new. For Bryce, for you, for this family." As they stood there in the quiet of the nursery, a sudden sense of clarity washed over Maya. She had always believed that it was impossible to escape the past, that it was something that would forever shape her future. But now, standing in this room with Arthur, she realized that the past didn't have to define them. They could make their own story, one where love, honesty, and forgiveness led the way. The next few weeks were filled with quiet moments like this, moments where Arthur began to take responsibility for his actions, and where Maya found her place as a part of the Moore family, not just as a caregiver, but as a voice of reason, a beacon of light in the midst of their dark history. They began to look at the future with hope, not fear. The estate that had once felt like a prison now felt like a home, a place of potential, a place of growth. But the truth was still out there. It still needed to be shared, and it still needed to be faced by the people who had kept it hidden for so long. The Moore family had begun to rebuild, but Maya knew that their journey was far from over. There were still whispers to confront, still stories to tell, and still hearts to mend. As the days turned into weeks, Maya found herself spending more time with Arthur and Bryce, forming a bond that went beyond duty and obligation. She was learning to trust again, learning to allow herself to feel connected to something bigger than just her own pain. And in doing so, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had found a family. Arthur's road to redemption was long and uncertain. But as they all stood together in the garden one quiet evening, the horizon stretched out before them, filled with promise. Bryce ran ahead, chasing a butterfly with the innocence only a child could possess, his laughter echoing through the air. And for the first time in a long time, Maya felt that the past was no longer something that controlled her. She could finally move forward, one step at a time. New beginnings. The weeks that followed were nothing short of transformative. The Moore family, once fractured by silence, guilt, and an unbearable weight of hidden truths, was beginning to rebuild. The conversations had shifted from accusations and blame to hope and reconciliation. Maya had become a key part of that transformation, not just because of her caregiving role, but because she had led the charge toward change. It wasn't about ignoring the past. It was about learning from it and moving forward with intention. Arthur had come a long way since that first moment of rage in the nursery. Every day he tried to be more present, not just for Bryce, but for Maya, for Eleanor, and for himself. His nights were no longer spent in isolation, going over the mistakes of his past. Instead, he had started opening up more to his family, sharing his feelings, his regrets, and his hopes for the future. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of discomfort, but Arthur was beginning to understand something that had always eluded him. Vulnerability was not a weakness. It was a strength. Maya watched this transformation with a quiet pride. She knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be smooth or easy, but she could see that Arthur was finally on the right path. He wasn't pretending that everything was fine. He wasn't acting like he had it all figured out. Instead, he was allowing himself to be real, and that made all the difference. And then there was Bryce, the little boy who had been the catalyst for all of this change. Maya had always been fond of him, but over time, her affection for him had deepened into something more. She was no longer just his caregiver. She was his protector, his guide. And she could see the potential in him, the same way she saw the potential for healing within the family. Bryce was growing into a curious, lively child, always eager to learn and explore the world around him. And Maya knew that he would grow up to be someone who valued truth, kindness, and resilience, values that he had learned, not just from his family, but from her. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon and cast a golden hue over the estate, Maya stood by the window, watching Bryce run across the garden, laughing as he chased after a butterfly. His laughter, innocent and unrestrained, filled her heart with warmth. She had come so far from the woman who had first stepped into the Moore household, uncertain and guarded. She had entered this house as a stranger, but now it felt like home. And not just because of the physical walls, but because she had created something meaningful here. She had given herself to this family, and they had, in turn, given her the space to heal. "Mom?" Bryce's voice cut through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing at the door, his face glowing with excitement. "Yeah, little man," she replied with a smile. "I found a really big butterfly. Want to see?" he asked, his eyes wide with enthusiasm. Maya chuckled softly and nodded. "I'd love to. Lead the way." Bryce grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the garden. As they walked outside, the warmth of the evening sun kissed her skin, and Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over her. This moment, this simple moment of joy, was the culmination of everything they had been working toward. They had come through the darkness and found their way into the light. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for Maya, that was enough. They reached the garden, where Bryce pointed to a large, colorful butterfly fluttering near the flowers. Maya knelt beside him, her heart full of gratitude. The butterfly, with its delicate wings, seemed like a symbol of everything they had been through. It was fragile, yet strong, able to fly despite the challenges it had faced. "You see that, Bryce?" she said softly, her voice full of meaning. "That butterfly is just like you. It's been through a lot, but it's still flying. You're strong, just like that butterfly." Bryce smiled, his face lighting up with understanding. "I'm strong like the butterfly," he exclaimed proudly. Maya nodded, brushing his hair from his forehead. "You sure are, kiddo." As they stood together, watching the butterfly disappear into the sky, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why she had fought so hard for this family. Not for the money or the legacy, but for the opportunity to create a better future for Bryce, for Arthur, and for herself. She was no longer running from her past. She had embraced it, and in doing so, she had found peace. Back inside, the house was quiet, but not in the oppressive way it had once been. Now there was a calmness to the air, a sense of harmony that hadn't existed before. Arthur was in the study, going over the final details of the memorial for Claire. Eleanor was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, humming a soft tune as she worked. Maya had learned to appreciate these moments of quiet, the ones where life felt steady and grounded. As the evening drew on, the family gathered around the dinner table. Bryce sat between Arthur and Maya, his face still glowing from the day's excitement. Eleanor served a simple yet delicious meal, and they all ate together, sharing stories of their day, laughing and enjoying each other's company. There was no tension, no bitterness, just love, and that was enough. After dinner, as the dishes were cleared away, Arthur turned to Maya with a serious expression on his face. "Maya," he said, his voice low but filled with sincerity, "I've been thinking about the future, about our future. I want you to know that no matter what happens, you're part of this family now. You always will be." Maya looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never expected to hear those words, but now that she had, they meant more than anything. "I'm here, Arthur. I'm here for Bryce, for you, for all of us." Arthur smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "Then let's make this work. Let's build something we can all be proud of." Maya nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose settle within her. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future would hold. But for the first time in a long time, she felt certain of one thing: she was where she was meant to be. That night, as Maya lay in bed, listening to the soft rustling of the trees outside the window, she thought about everything they had been through. They had faced so many obstacles, and yet they had come out stronger. They had built a foundation of truth, love, and forgiveness, one that would last no matter what the future held. As she drifted off to sleep, a peaceful smile played on her lips. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready. She wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone anymore. And together, they would face whatever came next. The legacy of truth. The following days were a blur of activity, but they carried with them a renewed sense of purpose. The Moore family was no longer trapped in the grip of their past. The journey of healing had begun, and with each new step, they grew stronger. It wasn't an easy process, and there were still moments of tension, but for the first time in years, there was hope. The weight that had once been borne silently, hidden behind closed doors, was finally being shared. Maya stood by the window of the study one evening, her gaze drifting over the sprawling grounds. It had been a few weeks since the memorial for Claire had opened, and things had changed within the estate. People came and went, some lingering with tears in their eyes, others pausing at the garden sculptures, their faces thoughtful. Each visitor left a small piece of themselves behind, and the stories they shared had become part of the larger narrative the Moore family was now building. It was hard to believe how much had shifted since Maya had first walked through those gates. She had come to this house as a stranger, an outsider, but now she was at the heart of it all. She had helped them confront the past, helped them uncover the truth they had been hiding, and in doing so, she had found her own sense of belonging. The Moore estate, once cold and distant, had transformed into a place of openness and understanding, a place where wounds could be healed and truths could be spoken. Arthur had taken steps to ensure the family's future would be different. He had taken responsibility for the decisions he'd made in the past, and the weight of those mistakes no longer hung over him as it once had. He spent more time with Bryce, and he had even begun to reach out to those who had been affected by the family's secrets. He was working on a new direction for the family's business, one rooted in honesty and integrity, and he was no longer just doing it for the legacy or the money. This time, it was for something far more important: redemption. But even with all the progress, Maya knew there was more to be done. She had discovered that healing was not a linear process. It wasn't something that happened overnight, and it wasn't something that could be achieved by just facing the past. It required patience, understanding, and above all, the willingness to keep moving forward, even when it felt easier to look back. That evening, as she looked out at the horizon, Maya's thoughts turned to the future. She had been offered many things since the truth had come to light: recognition, gratitude, even a permanent place within the family's legacy. But what she wanted most was to see Bryce grow up in a world where truth was valued over silence, where honesty was celebrated, and where love wasn't something to be hidden, but something to be shown. She wanted to build a future for him, one free of the shadows that had once loomed over the Moore family. As she turned away from the window, her eyes caught Arthur's across the room. He had been sitting at the desk, poring over business documents, but now he was watching her, his gaze steady and warm. There was a moment of silence between them, and in it Maya felt a quiet understanding pass between them. They had come so far, and they both knew that this journey wasn't over yet. "Arthur," Maya said softly, breaking the silence, "do you ever think about what comes next, after all of this?" Arthur looked up from his papers, his expression thoughtful. "Every day," he said quietly. "I think about what we've built here. I think about the changes we've made and the mistakes we've acknowledged. But I also think about how we can continue to make things right. For Bryce, for the family, and for everyone else who has been affected by our silence. Maya nodded. She had always known that this journey would be about more than just her own healing. It would be about setting an example for others, for showing them that it was possible to change, to rise above the mistakes of the past. But it would also be about creating a legacy that wasn't rooted in wealth or power, but in the truth. That's why I think we should do more, Maya said, her voice steady. We've done a lot already, but there's still so much more we can do. There are so many other families out there who have been silenced, who are still living with the weight of their own hidden truths. We can be a part of that change, Arthur. We can help them find their voices, just like we've helped each other. Arthur was silent for a moment, his gaze meeting hers with a mix of admiration and something deeper, perhaps a new sense of purpose. I've been thinking about that too, he said, his voice low. The memorial was just the beginning. I think it's time we start something bigger. A foundation, maybe. Something that supports people who have been affected by family secrets, by mental health struggles, by those who've been silenced. Maya smiled, the weight of the idea settling in her chest. A foundation. Yes, that's exactly what we need. We can use the More name to do good, to create a platform for those who have been overlooked. Arthur nodded, his eyes bright with determination. We can give them a chance to speak. We can make sure their stories are heard. And maybe, just maybe, we can help others heal, just like we've started to. Maya walked over to where Arthur stood and placed a hand on his arm. This is it, Arthur. This is what we've been working toward. Not just for us, but for everyone who's been hurt by silence. We can make a difference. Arthur took a deep breath and nodded, a small but genuine smile spreading across his face. We can. As the evening wore on, the family gathered together for dinner. Bryce, now old enough to walk on his own, toddled into the dining room, his tiny hands reaching for the table. Eleanor beamed at him, her eyes filled with affection. The atmosphere was light and filled with laughter, but beneath it there was a sense of shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had all been on. Maya sat at the table, her hand resting on Bryce's little shoulder, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a family dinner, this was a celebration of survival, of change, and of the future they were building together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in that moment, Maya knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would have its challenges, but they would face them together. They had faced the darkness, and now they were walking toward the light. With truth in their hearts and love as their guide, the Moore family was ready for whatever came next. In the final part of Maya's journey with the Moore family, the changes they've undergone are solidified through deep conversations and collective healing. The journey of redemption for Arthur, once a distant and flawed patriarch, has brought him closer to understanding the true meaning of love, vulnerability, and family. Maya's role in their transformation cannot be understated. She has been the bridge between past mistakes and future growth. As the Moore family begins to embrace honesty and open communication, they decide to expand their healing efforts by creating a foundation to help those who have been silenced by family secrets and mental health struggles. Maya and Arthur both recognize that their work is far from over. They realize that the Moore legacy is no longer just about wealth or power, but about using their platform to bring healing to others. Together, they come up with the idea of a foundation dedicated to offering support for those who have been overlooked or silenced by societal structures. As they move forward, they embrace this new mission, one that will allow them to use their resources for good and to make a lasting impact on the world. In this chapter, the family's future becomes a beacon of hope, redemption, and love as they turn their attention toward not only their own healing, but also towards helping others find their voices. The Moore family has come full circle, from a house shrouded in secrets to one that is finally filled with truth and love. With each step, Maya and Arthur forge a new path together, one that will guide them and future generations toward a brighter, more honest future.